A routine airport trip turned into a nightmare when a world-renowned black scientist with top federal clearance was handcuffed and humiliated by a racist officer. What began as wrongful suspicion soon unraveled into a shocking revelation that left the entire airport stunned. The terminal at Atlanta International buzzed with its usual rhythm. Families rushed to gates. Business travelers tapped on laptops. Announcements echoed overhead. Dr. David Mensah stood in line for security, his boarding pass in one hand and his passport in the other. He was calm, focused. He had done this routine countless times before. His dark blue suit was pressed, his shoes polished, a neatly packed carry-on roll behind him. David was not an ordinary traveler. He was a senior nuclear scientist working on classified government projects. He had been invited to a high-level summit in Washington to present findings on national energy security. His presence on that flight was essential, but to Officer Rick Mills, watching from across the checkpoint, David looked like someone else. Mills was young, impulsive, and eager to prove himself. He had a reputation for aggressive stops that his supervisors overlooked. When he saw David, he narrowed his eyes. A black man in a suit, confident and composed, moving without fear, Mills felt the need to assert power. "Step out of the line," Mills barked as David placed his bag on the scanner. David turned. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Don't question me. Step aside." Passengers turned to look. David complied, stepping into a corner as Mills circled him. "Where are you going?" Mills asked. "Washington, D.C." David answered calmly. "Business or pleasure?" "Business. Government work." Mills smirked. "Government work?" "Right. Got ID." David handed him his passport and boarding pass. Mills looked at them and frowned. "You think these look real? This doesn't add up." "It's authentic," David replied. "You can scan it." But Mills wasn't interested in facts. He wanted control. He snapped his fingers at another officer. "Cuff him. We're taking him in." Gasps rippled through the line. A few passengers recorded with their phones. David's voice stayed level, but his heart pounded. "Officer, you're making a mistake. This is unlawful." Mills sneered. "You don't tell me the law. I decide who's a threat." Cold metal cuffs snapped around David's wrists. His suitcase was tossed aside, his documents shoved into Mills' pocket. The humiliation burned, but David stayed silent. He had learned in life that sometimes silence spoke louder than protest. As they walked him toward the holding room, a TSA supervisor hurried up. "What's going on here?" Mills answered quickly. "Suspicious individual. Fake documents. Possible threat." The supervisor glanced at David, then back at Mills. Something didn't sit right. But before he could press, Mills pushed David into the holding area and locked the door. David sat in a chair, cuffs cutting into his wrists. He stared at the wall, breathing steady. "Phone call," he asked. Mills laughed. "You think you're entitled to anything? You'll sit there until we're done with you." David looked straight into his eyes. "You're making a career-ending mistake." Mills snorted and walked out. But outside that room, David's absence was already causing ripples. The Department of Energy had expected him on the plane. His federal escort at the destination noticed a delay. Calls were made. The system flagged his clearance. His ID wasn't fake. It was one of the highest security clearances in the nation. By the time Mills returned with paperwork, his radio crackled. "Hold all processing. Washington is calling about your detainee." Mills frowned. "What?" "You heard me. Washington wants him released immediately." Mills felt the blood drain from his face. Inside the holding room, David sat quietly, waiting. He knew the moment was coming. The moment the officer realized he hadn't just harassed a traveler. He had handcuffed a man whose clearance could ground flights, shut down terminals, and trigger federal investigations. And the fallout was only beginning. The holding room door burst open. The TSA supervisor walked in with two other officials, their badges shining under the fluorescent light. Behind them, Officer Mills stood stiff, his jaw tight. "Dr. Mensah," the supervisor said quickly, "we deeply apologize. There's been a mistake. You're free to go." David lifted his cuffed wrists. Then remove these. One of the officials immediately unlocked the cuffs. Red marks remained on his skin. He rubbed them, his face calm but eyes burning. Mills tried to speak. "Sir, I was following." But the supervisor cut him off. "Quiet. Do you know who this man is? His clearance outranks half the people in this building." Washington called. "The flight won't leave until he's on board." The room went silent. Mills' face flushed with humiliation. David stood, straightening his jacket. "You treated me like a criminal for standing in line with a boarding pass and passport. Tell me, officer, what made me suspicious?" Mills looked down. He had no answer. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Dr. Mensah, we'll escort you directly to your gate." As David walked back into the terminal, escorted by 2 federal officials, passengers who had witnessed the arrest gasped. Some clapped quietly. Others whispered. Phones came back up, capturing the reversal. The same man who had been dragged away in cuffs was now being walked to his flight with the respect reserved for dignitaries. David stopped at the checkpoint, looked back at Mills, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Respect is not optional. I've worked my entire life for this country's safety. Yet you thought a black man in a suit couldn't be trusted with a passport. That is the danger we live with daily. And this is why trust in law enforcement keeps breaking." Passengers nodded. Some shouted agreement. The officer shrank under the weight of the crowd's gaze. By the time the plane took off, news outlets were already running the story. Scientists with federal clearance wrongfully detained at Atlanta airport. Videos from passengers spread fast. The footage of David in cuffs, compared with him walking back with an escort, created a viral contrast. The Department of Energy released a statement. "Dr. Mensah is one of the nation's leading scientists. His expertise and clearance are critical to national security. The treatment he received was unacceptable and will be investigated at the highest levels." Officer Mills was suspended within 48 hours. His records surfaced, multiple stops of black travelers, none of which had led to charges. Complaints ignored in the past were now revisited under public pressure. David did not stay silent. Days later, he stood at a podium in Washington, his suit sharp, his face firm. Cameras filled the room. "I am not telling this story because I seek attention. I am telling it because no title, no clearance, no degree should be required for dignity. You should not need a badge, a medal, or government papers to be treated as human. I was fortunate my position revealed the truth. Many are not so fortunate, and they are left humiliated, voiceless, and forgotten." The applause was long and heavy. David's words traveled beyond that room. Universities invited him to speak. Advocacy groups shared his story. He became not only a scientist, but a public voice for accountability. Months later, he returned to Atlanta airport. He passed through the same security line, the same checkpoint. A few TSA agents recognized him and nodded respectfully. This time, there were no interruptions. As he walked toward his gate, a young black boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointing. "Mom, that's him, the scientist they tried to arrest." David stopped, knelt down, and smiled. "Always remember, young man, you don't need anyone's permission to belong here. This is your country, too." The boy grinned. David stood, straightened his jacket, and continued to his flight. He carried no anger, only resolve, because he knew the fight for dignity was not over, but he also knew it was one he would never abandon. Titles should not determine who deserves respect. Every person deserves dignity, without suspicion or prejudice.